Hello there. Thank you for joining me. For those of you new to my channel, my name is Mindy Mandell. I got interested in Platonic philosophy a little more than 20 years ago, and I've been doing this channel now for about 2 years, almost 2 years now. If you go to my channel page, you will find videos on all of the dialogues that are generally recognized as genuine dialogues written by Plato. From today, what I'm going to do is move away from that kind of video into topic videos. Some of them will deal with metaphysics, others with other topics involved with life as a Platonist. What I want to talk about today is the first cause in our metaphysical system. And sometimes Platonists call that the one, sometimes the good. So what I want to talk about today is why we have two names for the same metaphysical term. Before we look at that directly, though, let's take a look at some basic structure of the metaphysical scheme. And this is a very rough one, of course. As I go on with these videos, I will do some videos dealing with specific realms of reality and talk about them in more detail. But for our purposes today, I think this will serve us fine. Now, what we'll find is that there are different sorts of diagrams that we can use depending on what we want to focus on. For example, sometimes I give kind of like a flow chart of the different realms. If I want to talk about the unfolding of reality from one realm to the next. Other times I might use a triangle, put reality at the top to signify the unity of reality, whereas as reality unfolds through realms, it becomes increasingly differentiated. And so when you get to the physical realm, at the base of the triangle, it's the widest. So different structures, different sorts of diagrams highlight different points. Here, as you can see, I have these three circles, one inside the other. Our physical world is the material realm, represented here by that red circle. For those of us who see ourselves as more than just physical beings, we may have had some experiences that are beyond what we can experience with our five senses, with our five physical senses. And so that brings us into the realm of soul. And so we see that soul is a larger circle. It's not separate from the material realm. The material realm is inside of it in this diagram because we don't experience the soul realm separate from the physical world. In fact, we call our intuition our sixth sense because we use it along with the five physical senses. It's not something separate, but we consider it beyond. And I should just take a step back for a moment for those of you new to the channel. Whenever I'm talking about metaphysics, I'll often use words like beyond to talk about realms, like the soul realm is beyond the material realm, or prior to. The soul realm is prior to the physical realm. So these are either spatial terms or terms about time. However, of course, we're talking about realms that are beyond time and space. And so in the metaphysical sense, we use these terms with a looser understanding, or we have to broaden our definition of words like beyond or prior to, because of course we're dealing with realms that are beyond, if I can use that word, they're beyond the physical realm, beyond time and space. Metaphysics, actually meta is beyond and physics is in the physical world. So we're looking beyond the physical world, outside of. And so we have to stretch our understanding of these words. Okay, but with that in mind, we can see that the realm of soul is beyond the material realm. And then even beyond that, some of you may have had some experiences of reality itself, of a realm of divine mind, or often in our metaphysics we call it the intelligible realm. And there's quite a bit we can say about that realm, but for now it's just represented by this blue circle, which encompasses everything. So everything that exists in any way is within that blue circle. And we often call reality being because it never changes. Our physical world is the realm of becoming. It's always going into and out of existence, always in flux. It never simply is, it's always becoming. So our physical world is often called becoming. The realm of reality is often called being. Soul in the middle, it has its essence in being, but its activity in time, and so its activity in becoming. So it's in the middle there, and it's that bridge, if you will, between the two. But everything that exists in any way is within that blue circle there. However, in our metaphysics, we go beyond this to say, well, anything that can be experienced, and if any of you have ever had, or maybe you've read about some peak experiences, experiences of reality itself, what Plato in the Symposium called beauty itself. This is the height of all that exists, of reality itself, the highest experience possible, if you will. And yet anything that can be experienced, we'd say it must have a cause. And what do we call that cause? Well, sometimes you'll see it described as the good, sometimes as the one. And so now we want to look at why we have those names. But first we have to understand the real pickle that we're in when we try to wrap our minds around the very concept of reality having a cause. Because a cause is always outside of its effect. A baby doesn't give birth to itself. A tree doesn't create its own seed. It gets a seed from another tree and grows, and then it makes seeds that grow different trees. It can't go back in time and make its own seed. So the cause is always outside of the effect. And that means that this cause, whatever we're imagining this cause to be, it doesn't exist. Even our thoughts, even imagining it, is putting it within that blue circle. It has a mode of existence as a thought, as an imagination, as a visualization. But what we're actually pointing to with these thoughts is something beyond even thought itself. It doesn't exist in any way at all. If it existed, it would be within that blue circle, and it would be part of the effect, so it couldn't be the cause. And so it's hard to even imagine what this is that we're talking about. Now, to help us understand this, I'm going to turn to one of the later Platonists, a man named Plotinus. And he's often known in academia as the father of Neoplatonism. Some of us outside of academia don't much like this name, Neoplatonism, because I think that it was created to try to separate these later philosophers from Plato, to say that these later philosophers who openly wrote about being spiritual were doing something different from Plato. Those scholars who want to say that Plato is not spiritual want to separate him, and so they made this new term. They're not Platonists, they're Neoplatonists. I tend to just call them Platonists, some of the later Platonists, historically later, but they're within the same tradition in my mind. But he is known as the father of Neoplatonism. His life is dated somewhere around 204 in the Common Era to 270. Now, to put this in some perspective, Plato lived in the 4th century BC, and his academy stayed open until somewhere around 86 BC. Some scholars date the closing at 83, but it's somewhere in that range. And then for some 300 years or so, we don't have a whole lot of knowledge of what went on, and nothing really memorable that we do have. But then along comes Plotinus in the 3rd century, and what we know about him from his biographer, a man named Porphyry, is that Plotinus didn't write much down for most of his life. And then towards the end of his life, his students begged him to please write something down so that they can continue studying even after he's gone. He wrote a number of essays. There are 54 of them in total. And then his student Porphyry organized them into 6 groups of 9. Now, the Greek word for a group of 9 is an Ennead. And so these writings came to be known as the Enneads. And I'm going to show you a quote from one of these Enneads. Now, there is a standard way of writing them for those of you new to Plotinus. So you see that Roman numeral 5 and then the 2. So that means that this is the 5th group there are 6 groups of 9. This is from the 5th one, the second essay in that group. So this is a standard way of marking them because, of course, different translators, and they're translated into many different languages and so on. But there's the standard way. And I'm going to show you a quote from the first section. And so often if I were quoting this in a paper, I would put 5 to 1, meaning the first section of that essay. Okay, and this translator, by the way, is Elmer O'Brien. And he calls this one the post-primals. Different translators may use different titles, but you can always go by that number to be the standard way of finding which essay. And he says here, Plotinus says, that the one is everything, and it's not everything. It is not everything because it is the source of everything. It is transcendently everything because there, and we're using the word there very loosely, of course, because there everything is. Or to be more exact, it is not yet, but it is to be. So we have this vague notion of this transcendent pregnancy, if you will, of reality. And then he asks, how can everything come from the one, which is simple and apparently has within it no multiplicity or duality whatsoever? And his answer, that everything can come from it precisely because there is no thing in it. In order that being be, the one must be not being, but being's begetter. Okay, so he's giving us a lot to wrap our minds around there, and you have to try to really sit with it. This is really a meditation, to sit with this and try to imagine what it means, this transcendent cause, or these transcendent conditions of reality, to be beyond reality itself. It's not being. There's no thing in it. It's not being. And it needs to be not being in order to be being's begetter. Plato also challenged people to think about this very idea. He says in his book 7 of the Republic that this contemplation of the one is one of those contemplations that will raise our soul and rise us out of the cave into the higher realms of thought, into the higher cognitive functions. Here's a quote from the Republic, and I use the Rouse translation here. He asks, what, after all, is the one in itself? He says that the study of the one would be one of the studies which lead and divert the soul towards the contemplation of real being. Okay, so this is an important contemplation, and here he's calling it the one. There are other places where he calls it the good. In fact, even in the Republic, he uses both. In books 6 and 7, where he's giving the allegory of the cave and the whole setup to it with the divided line, he uses good instead of one. There's nowhere where he specifically goes into a long discussion equating the two. The closest he comes to doing so is, again, in the Republic, with a quote I'm about to show you. And this, again, is from the Rouse translation. I'm just giving you one sentence, but it captures within it quite a bit that can be unfolded, and I'm going to unfold very soon. But he says here that the evil is all that which destroys and corrupts, and the good is what preserves and benefits. Now he's using evil and good here in a very precise way, because he's not talking about evil in general. And also I should point out that evil is not meant in that moralistic way that we tend to use it today. We bring our Judeo-Christian state of mind to our reading of Plato, but he didn't have that state of mind. When he talks about something that is evil, he just means unhealthy when it's in the soul. And in this case, he's using it to mean that which destroys or corrupts. And the good is then what preserves and benefits. So for example, take a book. And this is one of my son's books here. So if you take it's held together, it's preserved as a book by the binder. And if you cut the binder off and the pages all fall apart, you can say it used to be a book, but it's not a book anymore. If I take a page out of the book and I soak it in water, It's eventually going to melt. It's going to be destroyed and corrupted. So that is the evil for that piece of paper. It doesn't mean in a moral sense. It's just the evil for the paper. It's what corrupts it and destroys it, takes away its wholeness. When you talk about what preserves, you're talking about what holds it together into a certain unity. And so there's an implication here of goodness and unity going together, and their opposites then being the opposites. The opposite of unity would be what destroys, what corrupts, what breaks it apart. And so the opposite of good would be evil. Now, in order to see this really opened up in an explicit way, we have to go a few hundred years forward again to the revived Platonic Academy. So the old Platonic Academy, remember, closed somewhere around 86 BC. And then in the 5th century of the Common Era, a new academy was opened somewhere around 410 CE. So all these dates, of course, are rough estimates. We don't know exact years. One number, though, that does seem to be precise is this 529 CE for the closing of the academy, because that was the year that a Christian emperor named Justinian closed all of the wisdom schools throughout the Greek world. So that date seems to be the one solid date, but everything else is a rough estimate. Now, there were a few different headmasters of this revived Platonic Academy in its 100+ years of existence. One of those that really stands out is a man named Proclus. And he became headmaster somewhere around 437, and he remained headmaster for the rest of his life. He died somewhere around 485. In those 50 years or so that he was headmaster, he wrote quite a bit. And not all of his writings have survived, but even what has survived, you could probably spend years reading his work. Partly because it's so difficult, and also partly because he wrote so much. His books are very long. He wrote commentaries on a lot of different Platonic dialogues, and many of them have not survived. There are references to them, so we know that they existed. And in his own writing, I mean, he made references to other things that he had written, but we don't have those anymore. We do have his commentary on the Timaeus, and it's generally published in 2 very thick editions because it's so long. His Theology of Plato is another very thick book, which may not even be complete. We're not sure that it's all of what he wrote. His commentary on the Republic has recently gone into publication. I think at least part of it has, and one edition, and there may be a second one coming along. So he wrote quite a bit. Now, there is one writing that stands out, partly because of its brilliance and partly because, well, it's short and it's out of character for him. His Elements of Theology, it's very terse and precise. And he wrote it this way because he was basing the structure on Euclid's Elements of Geometry. What Euclid did was he started with a point, just a single point, and he defined the point, and from there he made a line, and then he made 2-dimensional figures like circles and triangles, and then from there he went on to like 3-dimensional figures like cubes and spheres, and he unfolded the whole of geometry, starting from just a point. Proclus took the same idea, only he started from the one, and then he unfolds his theology in 211 different propositions. What I want to focus on today for this video is his 13th proposition, because this is where he directly equates the one and the good. So I'm using the Thomas Taylor translation. For those of you not familiar with this writing, there are 2 popular translations. One is by a man named E.R. Dodds, and the other is Thomas Taylor. The Dodds, they're both very good translations. Either one is perfectly fine to use. The Dodds translation does have the benefit of including the Greek. For those of you who read Greek, the Greek is on the left and the English on the right, and so that makes it useful for that purpose. But if you don't care about the Greek, the Thomas Taylor is also very good, and that's the one I'm using here today. Okay, so he says, this is the basic proposition. So usually the proposition is unfolded in just 1 or 2 sentences, and then what follows is an explanation in the unfolding of it, and that usually just takes 1 paragraph or a few paragraphs at the most. Okay, so every good, He says, has the power of uniting its participants, and every union is good, and the good is the same with the one. And so now he needs to explain what he means by this. He says that if the good is preservative of all beings, on which account also it is desirable to all things, so building very much on what Plato wrote in his Republic, that it's preservative, it preserves it, it holds it into place. And if it is preservative of beings, but that which is preservative and connective of the essence of everything is the one, for all things are preserved by the one, and dispersion removes everything from essence. He says that if this be the case, then the good will cause those things to which it is present to be one, and it will connect and contain them according to union. And you can see this with anything around you. Your body has to have unity in order to be a body. And when we die, the soul is separated from the body. It's no longer a living body. Or like the example of the piece of paper that I mentioned before, if I were to rip up a piece of paper, it would no longer be a page from a book. Each little piece would be a piece of paper, and it would have a certain unity to it. But the unity that used to be there would no longer be there. If you take apart the device that you're watching this video on, you'd have all the parts, but it doesn't have its unity. The unity is like something separate in addition to all the parts. And so you must have this unity to exist. And so this is a condition for all existence. And this is a good, he's saying. And then he says that if the one is collective and connective of beings, it will perfect everything by its presence. So you see what he's doing here? First he started from the good, saying if it's good, it must be one. Now he's saying if it's one, it must be good. Because if the one is collective and connective, then that means it's also going to perfect everything. And by the way, just as a side note, if you do want to go on with this writing, with this book, The Elements of Theology, if you want to go through it, what you'll notice is that when he does get to the realms of reality, he talks about them in a triadic way. And there are many different ways of naming the three parts. The most common is perhaps abiding, proceeding, and reverting, which I've talked about in some of my past videos. But another way of naming the three parts is collective, connective, and perfective. So he's introducing that idea even before getting to the realms of reality. He's introducing it here. So the one is collective and connective, and it will also perfect everything by its very presence. It's what allows it to be what it is, that wholeness. And hence, therefore, it is good to all things to be united. And then he goes on to say that if, however, union is of itself good, and the good has the power of uniting, then it follows that the simply good and the simply one are the same, uniting and at the same time benefiting beings. Now he has to take another direction, because the basic dialectic, the Socratic dialectic, the structure, especially as Proclus followed it and presented it in his commentary on the Parmenides, is that you first look at a thing, what it is and how it functions. And then the second half is to say, if the thing was not functioning, what would follow? Now, he's using that basic structure here, looking at the one and the good and saying, look, the way they function is basically the same. It is the same. And there's all this overlap. And so he says, if it's one, it must be good. And if it's good, then it also functions as the one. So he just showed that. Now he's taking the negative side. And he needs to show that if the good is not functioning, then neither is the one. And if the one is not functioning, then neither is the good. If either can function without the other, then you cannot claim that they are the same. So this is also necessary for his proof. And that's what he's giving us here. He says, hence it is that those things which after a manner fall off from the good are at the same time also deprived of the participation of the one. And those things which become destitute of the one, being filled with separation, are after the same manner likewise deprived of the good. And so then he can conclude that hence goodness is union, union is goodness, and the one is that which is primarily good. And so going back to our initial diagram here, we see that these conditions, or the cause of reality of all that is within that blue circle, or all that is depicted by the blue circle, I should say, is beyond it or outside of it, and we call this either the good or the one. Okay, from next week, I'm going to look more closely at that realm of reality, what I call the absolute realities. This is the eidos, or the ideas or forms, make their home there. I call them absolute realities, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them next week. So if you have any questions or comments about anything I did today, feel free to leave those below. Also, if you have any ideas about other topics you would like me to cover, I would appreciate you including that, and I will, try to make a video on that as well. I do have a list of things, so don't worry if you don't have any ideas, they'll keep coming. But if you do have some idea, I want to put that higher on the list, so please let me know. And if you like what you saw today, it only takes a few seconds to hit the like button. I'd really appreciate it. And I do hope you'll join me next week. Thank you very much.